5. Welcome back to the meal. This is your host Warren B. I'm so excited to be here today. I have a new guest today. Like I said, a lot of times when we try to have we talk about different things, but then sometimes we get a chance to have a guest that's some kind of expert in their field, got a new situation for us. This is Dr. Hebert Wallace. She is a licensed social worker, got a doctorate degree in social work, and nice to meet you. How you doing today?
It's nice to meet you as well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. You want to call you Dr. Hebert? You want to call Dr. Alissa? What do you want? What
Just call me Alissa. That's fine.
Alissa?
I've been Alissa since I was born.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll tell you one thing I'd like to know is just kind of give me a quick bio, kind of tell me how you kind of got in this field, how did you even get in the field of social work?
Alrighty. So I feel like I've been in social work for about 1,000,000 years. I was telling you earlier. I've been a practitioner since 2001. Okay. I just kind of fell into it, honestly. I was a theater major first.
Wow, okay.
And then had some things happen, and I changed my major and changed schools and all that. And so I just kind of fell into it. It was really the only thing that was available at the time.
From social work, from being in social work.
And and I kind of thought I was going to maybe not do anything with it. And then here I am.
Wow.
It's 2024. Got my doctorate, and I'm licensed in 2 states.
Wow. So to go from one to the other, what kind of kept you to a point where you kind of got you saying, hey, I need to get further education, maybe I need to go? What kind of pulled you in that direction? What was it about social work that kind of got you in?
So I got my master's so that I could be licensed, because my bachelor's degree is actually not in social work. It's in family and consumer sciences.
Okay.
Because the school I went to didn't have a social work program. They just had a FACS program. And so I needed to get my master's so that I could be licensed. And then 20 years later, the bottom fell out. Wow. And we weren't doing anything for a little while. Yep. So I thought, maybe I'll go back to the school. Yep. Here I am.
I've never met a social worker or counselor who didn't have like a story kind of like that. Like, I think when I went to school, I'm an ag major actually. My bachelor's was in agriculture. I started in that. And then I actually switched. I was in physical therapy. I have a master's in kinesiology, which is kind of like, and I was an athletic director thing for a master's in that, and I was a personal trainer, and so I kind of ended up doing social work just to take a class to see, because I liked it, but I didn't think I was that. I said, that's what eggheads, people smarter than I am, and all those things, and kind of fell in love, and it's just weird sometimes, and I think those life experiences put us in a unique place, and you use all that. You probably pull from everything. I'm most definitely, I bet you pull from theater.
Oh, absolutely.
Try to use that in that. So that is awesome. But what was awesome about it, I think I was talking to Dr. Loggins. I think I kind of spoke with her, and she was telling me that she had an excellent person that might be able to come on our show and give us some information. Because the whole purpose of this show is about bringing awareness. Okay. Awareness not only to like mental health and addiction and relationship. We also talk about relationship couples therapy, but also about just things that affect people. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the things that kind of ties into what you talk about is compassion and fatigue. So that was kind of unique. It was a different thing. When I was telling the person about it, I was like, wow, that's something I hadn't heard of. So you gotta give us a little, and I'm gonna listen because I'm a talker, but I'll be able to listen today and kind of you be more of the expert on that. So tell you what, just kind of give us whatever you got. Just be ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
So compassion fatigue is the quick and dirty way is burnout to the next level. Wow. So in pulling all that out,
what about burnout? What is burnout? First
so burnout is like we can all have burnout, right? Okay. Students can have burnout, teachers can have burnout, policemen can have burnout, landscape artists can have burnout, anybody can have burnout, and that's just when you have kind of hit your level, right? You've just kind of gone about as far as you can go without feeling, tired all the time, or sometimes some anxiety just related to the thing that's running you out, right? Okay. So students start getting anxious about tests, or they can't get up for school, but they can get up easily on the weekends, or we as adults have a hard time getting up for work, but we can get up on the weekends, or we can get up for vacation. It's because what's burning us out and what's draining us is work.
Okay.
And so compassion fatigue is that plus secondary traumatic stress.
Wow. Okay.
So people who have secondary traumatic stress are helpers, right?
Okay.
Social workers, marriage and family therapists, addiction counselors, policemen, firefighters, doctors, nurses, teachers, first responders, all of those folks, right? We either see or hear traumatic stress every day. And so if you couple all of that traumatic stress with the feelings of burnout, then you get compassion fatigue.
Wow, that's pretty big. That is a lot. Wow. So a person, it was like somebody like Curtis who's dealing with social. He deals with social things on a level. He consumes that information all the time. Can you get burnout as well as that? You think that's
Absolutely.
also
Absolutely.
Just seeing the things in the world and not changing and want to change that. So that can affect, not even just those people as well.
Right.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily folks who have those titles, I guess, but folks who deal with social justice, right?
Wow.
Because you can absolutely, there's traumatic stress going on with social justice and people who aren't receiving social justice. And we're seeing things like police brutality, or we're seeing things like generational trauma in certain groups of people, right?
Okay.
Indigenous folks,
Right.
Black folks.
Right.
There's generational trauma that comes with being in those groups. And so if you are working, right, we have a lot of folks who work for social justice who don't have DSW behind their names, right? They just do it because it's what they do, because they're called to do it. Then yes, those people can absolutely have compassion fatigue because they can get kind of that regular burnout with that, but they're also having all of this traumatic stress to do with it. And so we're seeing it in a lot more people. It started out with just nurses. The first time the term was used, it was dealing with nurses, and so it's kind of grown since then.
When was it first brought out? When did they first start talking about that?
In the 90s.
The 90s, okay. What was happening? What was
It's relatively new. So the first person to use it just figured that nurses' burnout was different than everybody else's. And then a social worker looked at that and said, not really. Let's look at what's really happening, and discovered that it was the traumatic stress and burnout that did it. And so he started studying how helpers were affected. And so he kind of grew it.
Wow. So it's kind of like when you think about police officers and all seeing the same thing. We call it kind of like being numb to a point where they see so much violence that and I have clients that come in sometimes and they almost like PTSD almost to a point where they've seen so much things like that that they don't have any kind of feeling about anything. You know what I'm saying? To a point where they're numb to to pain, numb to suffering. To a lot of these things, or they see only the bad in the world to a point where they go and they don't see anything good in the world sometimes. So that's fatigue. I guess they're tired of seeing it.
Absolutely.
And I think I'm kind of like that almost on things like things that happen sometimes to African American people. You've seen so much of to a point where you just kind of like just tired of just seeing another things. To a point where I don't watch the news. I don't watch news at all because it's almost fatigue. So that's awesome. I've never heard of that compassion fatigue. I thought it was almost more like a person where they're kind of like tired of being nice to people because they're because people need to hear something else because that has not got anywhere. So.
Right, and sometimes we feel like we're tired of being nice, but compassion actually works on the dopamine receptors in the brain. Okay. So you actually feel better when you're compassionate. But so there are some folks who say, well, compassion fatigue is not really. You shouldn't say that because compassion doesn't fatigue. Well, no, but in your role as somebody who provides compassion, you are exposed to secondary traumatic stress. And so that's where you get this compassion fatigue. So in all of these roles, we also experience compassion satisfaction.
Okay.
And so the good thing is, though, that just because your compassion fatigue is high, it doesn't mean your satisfaction is low. So you can still have a great amount of compassion satisfaction, which is why we keep doing our jobs.
Wow. Okay.
We just need to get some help when we need it.
Okay. So it's different. So the satisfaction part is coming from, just doing what you do. That's kind of like the intrinsic reward you get from doing the things you do.
Absolutely.
But the fatigue is just doing it. And so I think almost like when I was working, I say I love my job, but I'm tired.
Yes.
I love my job, but it's just worn out. Sometimes to see the same thing, and I guess that's really what PTSD is. You're revisiting the same thing over and over again. But with your job, when you're serving people, you're receiving the same thing every day. And so it's almost like you're putting yourself in a traumatic situation.
Yeah.
Especially like I know in my field, especially in the field of addiction, where you see the same thing, you hear the same stories, and then you also repeat it. And sometimes I think it's the hopelessness that you receive, that you can get fatigued from, the reset. So the traumatic part, can you go into a little bit more about that when you're saying that? What was that traumatic?
Sure. So secondary traumatic stress is, it basically has the same symptoms as PTSD, but it's if the trauma happened to you and then you tell me about it. Okay. And then next week you come back for therapy and you tell me about it again. And then next week you come back for therapy and you tell me about it again. Yeah. So my being constantly exposed to your trauma gives me secondary trauma.
It's the what is that called? It's the where it is what is that called? What is that? I can't think of the name of that. What is that? But I know what you're saying. You're saying you're experiencing it. It's almost like they're putting it on you almost. Right. You kind of take a little bit of it, but it also
you take a little bit onto you, so you do have
projection.
Projection.
That's the word.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're projecting.
Secondary traumatic stress is real.
Wow, that's awesome.
We can't just tuck it in. We as helpers can't just say, "Oh, it's just my job," or "Oh, I got into, I knew what I was doing when I got into this," or whatever. We have to be able to recognize or talk to people, right? When you operate on an island, that's the worst time. You need to have friends, you need to have peers that you talk to, supervision, all of those things, so that those people can maybe reflect back to you, "Hey, I've noticed this change in you," or "Hey, I've noticed this recently." Or you can say, "Hey, I've been feeling kind of down lately," or "I notice when I get home I'm really irritable." So, when you notice that there's a change, it's kind of some of the same symptoms, like I said, of PTSD, but some of the same symptoms as anxiety and depression and those things, where you're having those negative feelings. That's when you need to maybe take a break, take a vacation, do some self-care, add some mindfulness. There's a whole lot of things that you can do to help yourself if you know that you're feeling some of this.
I think we leak. I think that's what happened. I tell people we leak. You know what I'm saying? We see all those things, but we leak because all of those things. I had to realize that one time with my son. It's like that. I used all my compassion at work, and then I came home and I worked in telehealth. And then when I came home, I think my son had asked me something, my youngest son, and I was like, and I was like tired, and I didn't have any empathy left for him. And I was like, my son loves me. He's crazy about his dad. I said, and so I need to save some of my compassion for my son.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, I need something left because I'm so tired that I've been on stage all day that I lose it. And I realized that, hey, you only have so much in you, regardless of what it is, before you get tired.
Right.
And so just being self-aware, knowing about yourself, I think that's one of the big things too. Working in this field, I think that's probably why a lot of therapists and counselors, they leave and go on other fields.
Absolutely, because they leave the field thinking, "Oh, I'm just burnt out on social work," or "I'm just burnt out on being a therapist," or whatever. And yes, we have lost lots of really good helpers because they thought they were just burnt out, but they would do the things to help the burnout, right? All of the things that you hear, self-care, or leaving your things at work, or all of those things. And the self-care and those things to help burnout didn't really help them. But it's because they weren't also addressing that secondary traumatic stress. Now, we haven't been talking about compassion fatigue for a very long time. It's only been about 20 years that we've been talking about it, and really it started with nurses and then kind of went out from there. And so now that we know, folks like myself are trying to be like, hey, there are some things that you can do, and you can stay in your job. You can stay a police officer, or you can stay a veterinarian, or you can stay a teacher, because we need to not only address the burnout, but we need to address this traumatic stress that you're having too.
Okay, wow. So tell me some of the things they can start doing that we can look at.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So if you do notice some of this stuff and you feel like it isn't just burnout, right? Some of the things that you can do for yourself. One of the things that you can do is talk to a professional, but not everybody can do that, right? Not everybody has the time, not everybody has the money, not everybody has it covered by their insurance. And so that's only one thing in a whole pocket full of things that you can do. One of the things that you can do is start a mindfulness practice.
Okay.
Studies have shown that mindful breathing 3 times a week. So that's very little, right? When you think about doing deep breathing 3 times a week, does have positive effects. So if you can do it more than 3 times a week, maybe right before you go in to see a certain client, or maybe right before you change into your uniform, or right when you get off shift, or maybe all of those things, that can actually help to decrease some of the signs of secondary traumatic stress. And so decreasing that that feeling of compassion fatigue. Another thing is guided meditation. You can do your own. You can find them on YouTube. You can write a script and read it so that you can record it, so that you can guide yourself into it. There is, let's see, I'm thinking of all of the things on my presentation. Expressive writing, which is when you take time for yourself and you take a starting point that is what you think is bothering you, and you just write for 10 minutes, and you write about whatever pops into your head, and you don't stop writing, and you just write and write and write and write for 10 minutes. Now, you don't want to have to go pick up your kids from school at 10 minutes. You want to write for 10 minutes and then have some time to decompress, because a lot of times if you're writing, you start writing about that trauma, or you start writing about a certain client that has had a very big trauma that maybe you relate to, or one that you notice you're always apprehensive before you see, that's going to bring up some emotion in you, and so you might want to have some time to decompress after that.
So like journaling, more like journaling, kind of like that, but you're expressive writing.
Right.
You're getting it, what you're saying, you're getting it out. Getting
it out, right. Okay. And so journaling is one of those things that can help too.
Right.
So journaling would be just writing about your,
what happened.
You know, we all know about journaling.
Expressive is more like venting almost.
Expressive, it starts, and you write just whatever comes into your head. If the color blue comes into your head in the middle of the sentence, you write, I'm thinking about blue right now. I don't know why I'm thinking about blue, but maybe I'm thinking, like, just whatever, and you don't stop.
Okay, never heard that.
Until your timer goes off.
Okay.
And then you go over it and see maybe what came out. But that's also something that's just for you. Right. Some therapists use it, but also never read what the client writes, because it's a tool to get out what you're feeling and what you're. So you want to do it somewhere safe. If you do it on your computer, you want to make sure that only you have access to it. You don't want it to be like on a public drive or something. You can shred it when you're done. You can throw it in a fire when you're done. You can lock it up. Just you want to make sure that it's going to be private to you and that nobody else can find it. Because some stuff might come up. You might write about how you feel about your kids or your spouse, or you know, you don't want those things that come up during expressive writing, because it's so raw. You don't want that to be looked at by anybody else.
That's good. Because I think a lot of times when I have therapy, I talk to clients about that. And sometimes you hear, if I wrote a journal, my husband found them. I said, sometimes, you know, they're not for that. You know what I'm saying? You have to write them and put them up somewhere, because sometimes those are just venting. There's a difference between venting and saying things. Sometimes you just need to get that out. Venting is good. And so that's good, because it kind of falls into, like, it's really therapeutic. It's really, you're saying that's almost therapy for the person who's giving therapy. And that's a need. And that's something we hadn't talked about, because we talk so much on here about actually the counseling itself. We don't really talk to the counselors or the people who are doing that, and that's a need too. And I think when I was on here last time, and I was talking, I had a guest in person like, one needs on that therapy. He talking about too, because he's saying some things, because we do. We're just human.
Absolutely.
Just human with to go to training, but we also need the same kind of therapy. And sometimes when you're around other people who are therapists, it's easy for you to kind of express that with them because you're the one that's usually giving it, but you need it as well.
Absolutely.
And then, one thing they teach you about that is because you can self-project, you can put that on somebody else, you can push that on the side. So that's awesome. So that's pretty that's a lot of information. That's different though. It's a different thought of that. So doing those things, saying those things like that, how's that been received? Has that been received pretty good about the?
Absolutely. So I spoke to a group of social workers in March, and some of them had seen me speak before, so they kind of knew what they were getting into. But there's a section where I asked them, how many of you have vacation days? How many of you had vacation days left at the end of last year? And so that's when I take my chance to really get on them, because that's some of the easiest things that you can do to address compassion fatigue. Take your vacation days, spend time with your family or your loved ones or whoever you choose to spend time with. Take a step away. Take your weekends. Do your notes while you're at work. Don't stay too long after whatever time, but don't bring your notes home if you don't have to.
Right.
If you do have to, make sure that you don't just do your notes at the kitchen table or in your bedroom, or if you work from home, you want to have it separate. Yeah. You don't want to just work where you live, because then everything gets jumbled. And then especially if you do develop burnout or compassion fatigue, then it's harder to do some of the easy things like self-care, because you're just never away from work. And so you want to be able to separate yourself.
Wow, that's cool, because I guess the things that you're trying to do, you end up not being able to do those things efficiently. Right. Because you can't really help people. I think that's one of the things I tell my therapist is that, if you're down, if you're sad, or you're mad, or you're upset, or you and your husband had a fight, you're not helping anybody here. No. The best thing you can do is get back, get okay, get rested up so that you can kind of deal with this thing, because you need a break from it. Because dealing with mental health, it is a term, people don't think about it, but we call it people in an hour. I get tired of people so long. At the end of the day, because people have all these different kind of issues, and if you're a listening ear, they'll dump it on you. You know what I'm saying? It's okay to get it, but if you care about people, you're empathetic. That's what me and Person talking about earlier about sympathetic and empathetic. If you're a person that really feels and try to do it, you kind of take on those feelings, and it can be a heavy weight. Yeah. And sometimes we don't know how to sit it down. You know what I'm saying? So learn to sit it down so that we can go play the long game and do that. That's one thing we try to do here too. Is when we get a chance to be off, we try to be off and be with our family and take time, because when you're serving even this way, and sometimes, like I said, the reward is short. So even though you feel the intrinsic reward, but you also have that thing where you don't get a lot of return sometimes. The social work and helping people, it's not the biggest. And entertaining people, you can make money all day, you can get a lot of people, but really trying to help people where they are. That sometimes the reward is few. But if you care about people, it's hard. But also you got to take care of yourself. And I'm glad you brought that up. That's good. I'm glad to hear about that, because it's different. And I think we was thinking about more like, hey, I'm tired of being nice and I need to be I just got because I'm getting tired. And because in a way it is, because people do need the tough love. They do need to know about that. And a lot of times people think about counseling, they don't think of this confrontational, but counseling is really good. Counseling is very confrontational. Absolutely. But it's confrontational based on what you said that you want. Right. So if you come in and you say, hey, I want help with learning how to communicate, and I tell you how to communicate, then I talk to you and you say you're still not doing those things, then my job as a therapist is to confront you on what you said you want. Right. This is what you told me that you wanted, and you're not doing this thing. You're saying you want a better community or like this, but you're not doing anything. You know what I'm saying? So what are you doing toward that? And that's really how it's supposed to be. You know what I'm saying? It's not all about it's so nice, and it's about confronting people on what they're saying. That's why you come to therapy. So. Right. But also understand that. But that's really awesome. That is an awesome thing. So anything else about compassion fatigue you want to add on there?
Just that helpers need help, and so don't be afraid to ask for it, because I threw in a little bit before, one of the ways that you can help yourself is by mental health services. And so a veterinarian I spoke with while I was getting my doctorate told me that she's always had a therapist, and that's one of the ways that she's dealt with. You know, because veterinarians get compassion fatigue because they not only have to deal with animals, but they have to deal with the humans that they come with, right? And they lose 100% of their clients because animals live shorter than
wow. You know what? I never thought about it.
Sometimes they are the active hand and losing those animals. And so, and that's really my area of specialty right now is working with veterinarians. And so
never thought about that. Never had that in my mind.
In that interview, she said she's had a therapist for a long time, and I said in that interview, I was like, look, I didn't tell her to say that. That was not me, folks. That was her all on her own. And so helping people need help sometimes, and we forget that a lot, especially if the helpers are supposed to be the tough ones. So like, yeah, social workers were supposed to be tough, and marriage and family therapists are supposed to be tough, but really first responders, police, firefighters, even doctors and nurses, but those other, you know, they have to be strong, and they have to be tough, and they have to put on a brave face, and they see some of the most gruesome things that any of us will ever see, right? Because I deal with death a whole lot, but I'm usually not
right there when
it happens, or usually the death that I deal with is cleaned up or when I have to do it, or even working in an emergency room, I've seen from 30 feet away when folks are in a code, but I'm not right there in the middle of it. So even if you have to be strong and you have to be tough in your help, don't be afraid to get to the help either.
Okay, that's good, because now when you were saying that, I thought about that, about the men, and so kind of bring that back to what I did. I do a men's group in my job, and one of the things about men, and I always tell them, is about being smart, not about being strong. And a lot of times, now I see quite a few policemen, and which I don't see a lot of firemen. I haven't seen a lot of firemen in my therapy, and seen a lot of first responders. I've seen a couple, but a lot of times what happens, just like when I was in the Army, National Guard Reserve, if you were a sick call, it was looked down on. So if you were sick, I told you could have your leg hanging off your bone. If you were a sick call, they he's a weak guy, he's soft. And so a lot of times, one of the things we do here is to try to get that stigma off that, hey, when you need help, you need to get seen. You need to say, hey, I'm burnt out. I got this going on, because that's when mistakes are made. That's when judgment calls are made, because you become so numb that you don't realize that you're numb. And one of the things I think is that's why we do this, is about being aware and say, hey, I need to have a therapist. I need to talk about that. Or I talk to guys that have been in the military. There's a storm and there's a still. I said that you go to counseling, that you go to debriefing. No, I didn't go to debriefing, because you know how it is in the military. And see, me knowing how it is, I know it. So guess what? They bring that back home. They get married, or come back home and then get into another job. I had a guy that was in the military, then he came back and was an EMT. So now, guess what? Now trauma again, death again, hadn't dealt with it, and so then 5 or 10 years later, he's in a marriage and he's having all these issues, and he don't know what's going on. I said, you never dealt with the first thing.
They end up seeing me in the ER.
Right, and then it's stacked. And now I got to use something. Now I got to get on some kind of I'm on an opioid, or I'm on real drugs, because I haven't dealt with it. And it's the seeds that's planted. And so when you don't get therapy, when you don't deal with those things grow. You know what I'm saying? And so, especially with men, and that's one of the reasons it's not about, male, but we're one of the least people to get those help. That's like doctors. I go to the doctor the least part out of, people. Like my wife goes to the doctor, she'll go to the doctor. For me, it's going to be a minute. I'm going to go to the dentist because I like my teeth. but like the doctor, I'm not going to go to the doctor. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to take an aspirin too fast. And so mental health, the only reason I probably didn't do any mental health is because I studied it. Because I remember when we first did group therapy when I was in college, and I was like, I'm not going to tell you to keep our business. And they was like, in order for you to be able to be a therapist, you need to learn it. So before I knew it, I was telling everything. I was like, yeah, this happened, because it was therapeutic. I saw that it was so much, helping that group. Because when you hear somebody else be brave and they tell what they go through, it's easy for you to be brave.
Right.
Like, they can tell that. I can share Alissa. I can share this. But a lot of times men don't understand that they can do it. And so one of the things in the group I tell them, I say, y'all, if you got emotions, it's for a reason. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of times people don't understand that all emotions that most men will even say they have is anger. Oh yeah, I get angry. Oh, I get mad. And they're not going to mention any other emotions. I said, like, no, I said anger is a secondary emotion. So you're disappointed, or you upset, or you hurt, or you're injured, or you're mad, or you're bitter. That's the real emotion. And so you got to deal with that. So anger is just something that just came out of there. You know what I'm saying? So that's really good, and I hope men respond to that more. Y'all, you get any men to talk to? I know therapy and social work the field is so small with men. Period.
I know.
There are a few men. So.
If we could have more men.
Yes, we need them so bad. We need men social workers and counselors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very, very small.
Absolutely. I think it's harder sometimes, even for men in mental health, to ask for help.
Why do you think the same thing?
I think it's the same thing. Yeah. Like, they have to be it's those gender roles. I think it just all goes back to gender roles, probably. Like, women, it's easier to provide help and it's easier to ask for help. Mm-hmm. But, men provide help in the stereotypically, like, I'm going to save you kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Protection role.
Protectors, saviors, those things. And so if you look at our field, right, in mental health, there's so few of you guys.
Right.
But if you look at police officers and firefighters, it's flipped, right? So those folks who are protectors and saviors, I'm so glad to see more women joining those fields because we can protect and save too. Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad to see more men joining therapy and counseling and social work because men can absolutely provide those supportive, nurturing therapy kind of things too.
I think just to see another man. I think another man. So I get a lot of confidence because they need to see that and be okay. Because like I said, I was bringing up the Bible because the Bible says that iron sharpen iron. What it means is that things that are like sharpen each other. And so when I'm in a men's group, I can say, okay, hey, I know you feel this because I feel this.
Right. I
know you're going through this because I went through this. You know what I'm saying? And I'm an average man. And so I know if I get tired, I get down, I get depressed, I get anxiety, you do too. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And I can hold it that. You know what I'm saying? And so, they can go to a person and they say, if it's a woman therapist, they might say, oh, you did? Oh, no, I'm not. I don't have any of those things. You know what I'm saying? And they have to try to be the male role. But if I go to a man and they're like, yeah, you're right. And I said, so if you have this, how are you dealing with it? Mm-hmm. I don't think about it. I said, guess what? It's coming back. It's going to come there. You know what I'm saying? It's going to deal with it. You're going to deal with it one way or another, in a good way or a bad way. So that's why I think it's a need. That's why we kind of do these things. That's why we have it because, we need to know that because we're still out in the world and the world has not changed. And so that need is there. And so to know about compassion fatigue and, hey, maybe if you didn't do anything, you're saying, hey, I'm making you aware. Right. This is what's going on.
Right. Awareness, and it can be, especially now that we know that there's a difference between burnout and compassion fatigue. Mm-hmm. If you're trying, and I know I talked about it a little bit earlier, but if you're trying to treat your compassion fatigue like you would treat burnout, mm-hmm. then you're not touching everything. It's just like if somebody has bipolar disorder and we're just treating the depression, well, that mania is going to come. Right. That mania is going to come back, and it might come back even harder the next time. Yeah. So if we're just treating kind of the physical symptoms, if we're just trying to, I'm so wrapped up in it that a lot of the things that you do to treat burnout can treat compassion fatigue, but if you're ignoring the fact that there is secondary traumatic stress, then you're really just treating your burnout part, right? And so you have to be able to admit that there's something else going on. Right. And so you want to be able to treat it as a whole, but if you don't know that it's there, then you can wonder, like, why am I doing all this self-care stuff and nothing's happening? Or why am I talking to my therapist about not wanting to wake up for work, but I'm not talking about all the other things that,
Because the person in trauma is different, right? Mm-hmm. Trauma is something that's traumatic. Trauma is deep. And I think that's what they don't realize. It's a little deeper than depression. It's like when you have grief, you have prolonged grief symptom. Prolonged grief disorder it's a difference because it's prolonged, it's deeper. You know what I'm saying? So trauma is deeper. You know, I tell people it's little trauma and it's big trauma.
Right.
Like bump your leg on the side of the leg, that's trauma because you're going to remember it. But if it's something on his sharp and I cut it, I'm gonna feel it deeper. And so it's something different. If I bump my leg, I might say, you know, I might not think about it. But if I cut my leg, I'm gonna say, Alissa, don't go over there.
Right.
It's different. It's sharp because it just, you know, I relive that. You know, when I see it. You know what I'm saying? And so trauma is different. And so understanding the trauma and being aware of the trauma is good. So, yeah. And then also you can be aware of it. Hey, when I see myself getting that way, I can kind of like cut it off at the edge, and so I can realize, hey, you know, now I need to take some days. I need to do some of these things you're talking about. So that's awesome. I'm glad to hear you shared about this. So that is so awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. But I don't know how that would have to do with the prayer years. I wanted to talk about that prayer. Do you think that's anywhere prayer you see anywhere you think that can tie into that anywhere, man?
Excuse me. Burnout fatigue.
Yeah.
Definitely can tie into it. So I'll go ahead and ask you because you know I do the tough love kind of thing, which is I thought burnout fatigue to a degree when Werner mentioned it. However, now I'm listening to you and defining and giving more details, and I think that maybe I'm just tough love. And that's just what I do because I come in frustrated already. So I guess I look at the funeral home. We're having COVID just came through, and not to mention how many of us were burying people. I think everybody had somebody. So burnout fatigue, because a lot of us have not gone to therapy, I think COVID might have burned us out and kind of took our, which word was it? Compassion, our sympathy probably. It removed it because it was back to back death.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And at some point, I think I remember people just kind of like, you know, it is what it is. It wasn't even crying and, you know, that real serious crying. Everybody was tough now. And it's almost like we were sitting around like, who's next?
It's numb to it.
Yeah.
It's almost like the shootings. There's so many. There was so many of those school shootings to a point when they hear about another one that you could almost just turn the channel. You know, and it was like, you know, I remember turning the channel one time and I was like, they're like, you heard about this? And I said, yeah. And I was like, that's bad that, you know, somebody has lost their life. Right. But it's so many that has taken place that you were like, I don't even want to hear about another death, and you know it's bad, but it's almost like your compassion has changed, and that's bad, because you know it's bad, you know it's terrible, but at the same time you're so used to it that you just almost kind of like you're tired of being, you know, you're tired of the bad news, you're tired of hearing that thing, and I think that's the same way with a lot of things, especially like what happened with a lot of race things. You'll hear about racism, things like that. People are so tired of hearing about another thing. It's not the fact that they don't care about it, but it's just like it's so heavy that they'd rather just put the whole thing down.
And that's exactly secondary traumatic stress.
Wow, that's awesome.
And so that would be the STS without the burnout, right? Because you're just living your life and watching the news and things are happening. You're not actually doing the work. So somebody who is on the ground doing the work right there is going to develop the compassion fatigue, but so that would be like without the burnout, right? You are seeing these traumas over and over and over again as part of your life because the news is on 24 hours a day and they think that we need to hear the bad news 24 hours a day instead of the good news. But so a lot of us have developed secondary traumatic stress symptoms, and numbness is one of those, just in life. And so it makes it easier for those of us who are helpers to develop compassion fatigue, because part of what goes into that is what's happening outside of our work. So if we've got secondary traumatic stress at home from our TV, and then we go to work and we have it again from our clients, it just, you know, it becomes compound trauma almost, and so it can increase those things. But yeah, a lot of folks who are just living life right now are having secondary traumatic stress from
They kind of just start focusing on themselves. That's easy why people can just say, I'm just going to focus on me. I'm not going to worry about, I can't change the world. I can't change these things.
Right.
And so I'm so burnt out or fatigued on it. I'm just tired of trying. Wow, that's good. Because I think that's really what we kind of move to a lot of, in the world. A lot of times people are just like, it's so much now that I've gotten numb to these events. You know what I'm saying? That, you'll hear that sometimes in these war-torn countries that it's definitely so natural. I can't remember somewhere I was at that they were so used to. I can't remember. I read a story about this guy. He was going to build a church, and they had to move. It was in a war-torn country, but there was so many bodies they had to move all these skeletons out of the way in order to build a church. And it was like they were so used to it, it wasn't anything. And I was like, that's what war does. It's so much trauma and so much death. That's what they was doing, and it's like they were sweeping up, some looked like some sticks or something, but it was bodies. You know what I'm saying? And what happened if we don't deal with it, we can get to a point where we're that numb. You know what I'm saying? And even the people who have a special heart, who care about people, you can get numb to that if you don't get any treatment and you don't come aware, and you can be that, and then you can be kind of like part of the problem. And those people need us, they still need us. So I'm so glad that you shared that with us. That's an awesome thing. So. Anything you heard before we go, man?
I'm kind of shocked over here still with this one. It's rarely that I hear one that I don't know about. But, this one, I think it touches so much. I think it touches everybody to some degree because it's not something we're really. I don't think this was on the radar for anybody. We had so much going on in the past few years. We turned into these almost cold people. I mean, our relationships are failing. Nobody wants to talk to anybody anymore. We just want to run to the divorce and get out of the relationship. Want to call everybody toxic. We're not taking a pause to be understanding. And I think that has to do with the building up from COVID. We in this shock and awe first. We can't go anywhere. That's trauma. And then when we talk about the kids, remember last week we were talking about that trauma sets you emotionally. Oh yeah. So
absolutely.
What are we going to be dealing with in the next 5-10 years if we don't get these people into some type of treatment?
Absolutely.
Because the children are COVID frozen. Because I think divorces went up during COVID with death. So we put these kids through so much in the past 4 years.
Absolutely.
So it changed the landscape, changed the world, how we look at things, and you mix all that. Because like I said, with COVID, it was so many deaths and so many things, and so
many.
Reading, and that's one thing I met with a lot of, and I see a lot of people who really don't know how to properly grieve, don't realize the grieving is not linear.
Right.
And then, multiple deaths in their family, not being able to bury them or be with their family group when it was going on because they couldn't be together. We couldn't assemble. So I hadn't dealt with that. I hadn't dealt with the fact how I feel about my dad. I hadn't dealt with the fact that I couldn't lean on my cousin. We couldn't talk about it because one of the ways of dealing with grief is telling the story. So all that, and guess what? We just kind of get on living. And then the world kind of keeps going with all these different things that are happening.
Right.
And like one thing me and Perez talk about is like repressed memories. So these repressed memories are here and all these different things. And so if we're not going to therapy, what are we going to? We're going to it. We're going to use. We're going to use some kind of, we're going to use food. We're going to use alcohol. We're going to use drugs. We're going to use sex. We're going to use all these pornography. We probably went skyrocketing. When all this stuff happened, we're going to use all these things. I know. Yeah, it's all.
Just to think about what's coming.
And we don't use it.
And what we fighting right now,
And so we need to be watchdog. We need to be aware of the fatigue, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to go on the front lines and help.
Right, absolutely.
And so we need it.
Right, and so everybody is dealing with a lot more than we used to deal with, right? And so it is important for folks who can develop compassion fatigue to know that the secondary trauma is going to be greater now because the world is more traumatic, period. Right. And so even than it was 5 years ago, right? It's a totally different look than it was 5 years ago. And so the things that our clients and the people that we meet and the people that we see teachers are going to probably have increased compassion fatigue because there's increased trauma with the little, like we were just talking about COVID trauma, right? 30 little COVID trauma kiddos running around your classroom. We're going to increase whereas 5 years ago you might have just been burned out. Right. Now you're going to have compassion fatigue, right? Because you're just hearing about all of these things. They might come to school and talk about their grandparents dying, or they might come to school and say, Mom had a baby and I couldn't go see it, or, all of these things that are getting better, but there's still some of that, right? We're still being kept away from people sometimes. And also, I'll tell you a good one is that I know quite a few people who have developed like these fears and phobias and panics, and I have quite a few that I deal with, even like saying, that COVID has, traumatized them to a point where they're, become germaphobes, or they're fatigued about certain things, or they're scared. And so those things are passed on. And guess what? If I have a child during that time, guess what? Those things are passed on. And I pass those things on to my kids. I'm not going to want my child to play in the dirt. We played in the dirt. I've been playing in the dirt for 44 years. Yes. And you need that. But if somebody who has developed some of these fears and phobias around COVID, then that spreads to everything else, right? The second, we all hear about, if you cough in the waiting room, then everybody's going to move away from you. Yes. But if that gets increased even more so, that you have all of these other, that somebody develops these fears and phobias, that's going to affect their whole family, right? Because their kids might not be able to play with other kids, or they might not be able to go outside and play for fear of catching something and bringing it into the house, or if they do go play, then when they get home they have to take a sanitizer shower, and some of this stuff sounds funny, and I'm kind of exaggerating some of this stuff, but it does really happen to a smaller degree, where if you develop these phobias, then it's going to affect your whole family.
Yes, and if you don't know it, that's a phobia. You don't realize it. And people don't know about fear. Fear grows. Right. And it grows, and that's where panic disorder comes from. You don't realize fear, anxiety, to a point where panic, and panic freezes you. Right. You know what I'm saying? If you have a panic disorder, you won't go anywhere. You know what I'm saying? And that affects. And so a lot of those kids that are born, you think about those COVID kids, I think me and Perch talked about that before, those kids grew up in it. You think about children who were born and conceived during COVID. Right. That's a whole different world. They have a whole different world too. Just like kids who grew up like after World War I or II or something like that. Their parents are different, the people are different, the world is different. And so that need for that, even when Perry was saying that, he said something about funeral home, but I thought about people who work in the funeral homes, man, they already usually have to be kind of colder anyway, but most definitely death after death after death, to a point where the hopelessness of that. And I think one of the things that a lot of counselors deal with, myself included, is almost like, especially in addiction, it's a hopelessness part. It's like, hey, what am I doing? Is it important? You know what I'm saying? There's so many deaths and there's so many returns, and the recidivism rate in addiction is it goes around so fast. Right. You see the same people all the time. Sometimes you wonder, hey, if you care, if you're there for a job, it doesn't matter to you. But if you care about people and you've seen it over again, you wonder, hey, what's my work worth? You know what I'm saying? So right. I think the need, what you're doing, like I said, is great. I'm so glad that you're doing those things you're doing, because that is most definitely eye-opening, you know what I'm saying, realizing it's not just burnout, that you also can be, traumatized by that. And so I'm so glad that you're bringing awareness to it. That is a most definitely need, even myself, you know what I'm saying, because even my field, I think when you're higher, it's hard to time to take off, and I do take more time than I used to. I probably need to take more time. Yes. Tell my boss to him and say, Alissa told me to take off.
Tell him that.
I need a week off. First, I need 2 weekends off.
Got it, man.
You know what I'm saying? So we can kind of get, because really, like I said, in order to be able to do what we do, we need to have that time, and we can kind of reset, So that's good.
I'll be taking a little vacation.
Yeah, personally you want to, But anyway,
she hit me real good with this one here today.
This is awesome.
I was thinking we should talk about tough love.
Yeah.
No, this ain't tough love. This is a little bit different, and I'm very excited about doing some research on this one, because this is a new one. So I'm totally kind of like, I don't know nothing about this. That's not what I thought. So having the professional here really makes a bit of a difference, and it's just so much going through my mind right now. I'm like, from the funeral home to the fireman to the nurse.
Yeah.
Like, imagine the nurse during COVID.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't even talk about the less used ventilators.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and how many people those nurses had to watch disappear because they had the wrong treatment going.
Right.
And you got to live with that. And,
just that by itself. Wow.
And then when we throw in, I don't even know what your government is actually doing, but during COVID, I have some articles where they were laying off nurses. So then we had all these nurses become travel nurses.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm still trying to understand what is the government's plan for the people. It seems like it's taking our situations and making them worse for the people who are trying to make them better for all of us. And that gets me upset because of the same thing they did during the crack years that we talked about, how they closed the mental health facilities in the 80s when crack hit, and all those people, they let them out on the streets. And then the families didn't have anywhere to send anybody with mental health issues. So these people are now homeless. We got veterans all around the place under bridges. And the police, my goodness, are called to help in any situation. And they're asked to be therapists, law enforcement, counselor, daddy. That's what pisses me off the most is that they close those mental health facilities and they put that on the back of the police. Yeah. The person who has, what you said, fatigue. He got it. He and her got it the most.
Oh, police most definitely have it.
And then they have to deal with these mentally ill people, and they're trained to say, if it's a threat, shoot it. And we haven't trained the police in all these years. I've never seen a sign where they're shooting in the legs. It's always torso and head. Where's the shooting in the legs, that you could do too. But it's almost like we're training the police to kill the sick people while we're closing the sick people facilities, or we're not making any effort to assist.
And it's a, what we have a thing with our police officer. I was talking to a police officer yesterday morning about the same thing. We talked about that, about the the hospitals closing, because they closed so many of the mental hospitals, and they're and what it is, they get a lot of mental, and so they're teaching them, hey, this is what's going on. And so even when we have people act out, I really don't call police because they're not. A lot of times they're not trained. It's the same way if I go to a lawyer. He worked in public service, but he was like, man, I'm supposed to have certain things. And I was like, man, people don't realize that. They think, well, he's a white male, he has the whole world. I was like, no. I said, you know how much pressure that is for him to be successful. He's like, I'm supposed to have a boat. He said, I'm supposed to have a Hunt Club membership at $10,000. I'm supposed to have all this and that. And so he went back in his room and he drunk all the time because he was a lawyer that was not successful. You know what I'm saying? He's a white male, and he's like, I'm supposed to be at the top of the totem pole. And I was telling myself, I understand. I said, you're supposed to be in the top level, and he's not what some of his friends are. But he don't realize that some of his friends had a hip hop. Their daddy might have been this, or their daddy might have been that, and they got him that first job or got him this thing. And so, but he's still dealing with that. And so he still has to go in and,
work. Yeah. He's an attorney in public service, and he's not working for facts or somebody.
But if he's in public service, he's supposed to be a politician. Most of the time they doing that, he's supposed to be getting ready to run for lieutenant governor or somebody, but somebody else might be better at the time. And so, and I was like, man, that's real. And then when he was talking about therapy, he was like, well, I can't come in here and go to therapy because I can't afford therapy. And then some of these people are locked up. And I was like, that's real. That's the real thing. And so guess what? He's still dealing with that, And so that's real. That's what people really are. And so that's what we need therapy to deal with that. See where that came from, what I'm supposed to be or what I think. And that's what that's what is also, is awesome, but it's also, it can be hard to deal with, but it's real though, That's what I love about therapy. Because he needs help just like anybody else,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I ain't a whole Miss Dr.
The work y'all do is greatly appreciated.
Well, thank y'all for having me. It was lovely.
Thank you for coming.
Maybe we talk a little bit about your thing.
No doubt. Okay, and I'm gonna go do some checking of some audios, and make sure you get the contact information for me. And the offer is real. would you like to have a show for real?
We'll certainly think about it.
You know, definitely think about it, because what you're talking about, I haven't heard before. This is brand new for me. And I think it really needs to be heard by everybody so that we can start to say, wait a minute, maybe that's what's creating the problem. And let me go talk to somebody before I run to this divorce or run away from the job. Because the one thing we can't lose right now, and Warner knows it, with the crack years being revealed as the forgetting part, we cannot afford to lose our therapists right now. We're going to need y'all like never before. You know, next couple of months, because I got people right now talking about they remembering stuff. And that, you know, when we start talking about it, they start remembering. They're going to need you guys' help.
All right.